All right, guys, what's up? I just want to do a kind of a video on a little bit different from my channel. I know I do a lot of short clips and using Bandicam, my little 10-minute recording time limit. But, you know, I like to keep videos short because there's a lot of 1 hour and 20-minute videos out there on YouTube where, you know, it's just some guy flying around. The great example, no offense to you guys, but like IL-2, for instance, you know, a lot of people flying around getting like, you know, 30 kills in an hour and 20 minutes and just flying around, or, you know, Call of Duty, or, you know, whatever other shooter or arcade style of play that you want to talk about. And it's, you know, it's basically showcasing your talents, which is fun, you know, showcasing your skills. And I guess that's okay, but, you know, my channel's a little bit different, short snippets, you know, and I really try not to brag or showcase anything. A lot of the stuff that you see on my videos is more tutorials, you know, which I love to teach. I love to help other people out, and not really too much opinion or anything like that. So this is a little bit different. It's an opinion-based conversation, one-sided conversation, and I want to talk about the future of flight sim. A little bit about the past of where we came from. I'll give you a little background on myself. My channel, you know, I go by Burner. I'm at DCS Wolfpack, and I've been a long-time flight simmer for probably 15 years now. That's not an exaggeration. Actually, probably closer to 18 years now. That's not an exaggeration. I started flying flight sim, Microsoft Flight Sim 95, and throughout high school, throughout college, and currently in my adult life. I don't keep a logbook of all the flight time. You know, I know some people can tell you exactly, like they've flown 8,000 flight sim hours, whatever the case may be. I can't tell you exactly what, but if I had to estimate, I'd say, I don't know, like 10,000. I mean, you fly for 15 years consistently, for the most part, then you log quite a few hours. I'm a real-life pilot, thankfully, thank God. I just got my private pilot's license back in December, and I'm very proud of that. It's a great accomplishment if you can do it. Very expensive, absurdly expensive. Not as expensive as overseas, mind you. I saw some posts on a few forums with guys trying to fly out of you know, Europe and stuff, and it's, you know, I paid something like, it was $120 for the airplane, another $50 for the instructor. So you're looking at $170 plus taxes on the aircraft, and a fuel charge on top of that, fuel surcharge. Some guys in Europe are paying like $250 per hour, just something outrageous. So even though the costs are high in America, you should be grateful that you're not in South America or Europe or one of the other countries, because it is absolutely outrageous. But if you could do that, that's great. Average age of a private pilot subsequently in the US is something like 55 years old, which it doesn't make any sense to me. That's the average age. It kind of makes sense. A lot of guys start their flight training later in life, usually in retirement or close to retirement, when you have enough money saved up where you can do it. And then they decide, oh, I've always wanted to be a pilot. They go out to the local flight school, do the flight training, maybe could afford an aircraft or a partnership in a flying club, and then they go out and fly. So if you have the resources and the time to do it while you're young, I strongly just encourage you to do it. It's a great accomplishment. Anyway, so that's a little background on me. You know, a little bit of real life flying, and a lot of flight sim experience. So I'm going to focus specifically on what we fly at DCS Wolfpack, and our name DCS Wolfpack obviously comes from Digital Combat Simulations. That's DCS. That's how the group was formed, and we started flying the A-10 about a year ago, and then immediately, you know, we had more interest in other sims. We jumped over to IL-2. We also started flying, started playing ARMA using Navy SEALs, DevGru type operations, which was an awesome experience, awesome blast. And currently we've picked up BMS. And so to talk about, maybe about a little bit about the history, I'm going to jump around a little bit. The main focus of this conversation or this talk is really about the flight sim community and the future of flight simulation. What we expect, where we came from. So with DCS, we came from an FSX Squadron. We were a Navy squadron, and we had just awesome experience there. We did carrier operations. We had a phenomenal training program where you'd literally go from the initial flight in the T6, just an intro flight, over to the T45 using Dino's amazing T45 in FSX. You'd go through your initial formation flying, basic flight maneuvers, communications, overhead brake over an airfield, and eventually you do your carrier quals in daytime, nighttime, and then bad weather. And this is all with an instructor. You do a solo cross country, which we sent you on, and then you graduated from the initial flight school to advanced. From intermediate on to advanced, where you would transition to the VRS F-18E Super Hornet. And then we'd start the curriculum and with everything from a ramp start all the way up to air-to-air refueling, and eventually weapons employment with TACPAC for FSX. Well, it was in the early stages of TACPAC, and they had, it was just an alpha or beta, to be honest. We had waited quite a long time. I think it was about a year and a half from the proposed date or announced date until it was actually released. And some people were really, really upset about it. For the most part, most people understood that they were, VRS was doing something in FSX that was taking it beyond, its capabilities, completely outside of the universe of FSX and what it was designed to do. So we were patient. In the meantime, some of our members were interested in DCS, so we got into that. And we were like, man, this is great. This is what we've been looking for. Being in an FSX group, in a specifically a military combat sim group, we were, our operations went something like this. You'd go out on training, you do whatever you do, group flights, a lot of transit flights, which is, we inherited that from the virtual airlines. That's they fly from one airport to another. Only difference between us and the airlines and the FSX was that we would do it as a squadron in formation with military calls, military procedures, and military aircraft. But for the most part, it was airline flying. We'd go to different stations, military bases around the world, and then and we would conduct military operations, but there weren't really, there weren't no live weapons. Yeah, there was animations and things like that. Yes, you could have aggressor aircraft, play the enemy and things like that, but it wasn't really a hardcore combat experience. Still very tense. Nighttime flying, low-level flying, simulated bomb runs on airfields and different targets. The great thing about FSX is the versatility is just incredible. You got, you can fly military package, including, I remember one mission, we had a seed flight, we had a combat airstrike, an airstrike on an air base. We had a combat air patrol overhead. Once that was done, we had the helicopters come in and do the CSAR operations over the airfield, actually pick up the POWs and head back home. So you got these massive capability in FSX, and that's because there's so much content available in it. You got helicopters, cargo planes like C-130s that you can use. You got KC-135 that you can jump into and fly, and then you got a host of military aircraft. You can pretty much recreate any squadron. The thing that was missing, the quintessential ingredient that we needed was combat, was actual weapons consequences. Okay, you crash an FSX, really no consequence. You get a crash message. When we flew multiplayer, we would disable crash, proximity collisions, because you could be flying 4 feet from your wingman and it would cause a crash and restart the sim. So that was no good. So we would turn off crashes, and when you landed on the carrier at 750 feet, per minute descent rate, which is normal, completely normal inside the operating range of an F-18 landing on a carrier, and you'd get a crash message. Or just getting close to the carrier, the scenery was such that it would give you a crash message. So we disabled that. So, one of the consequences of that was that there were no consequences. I mean, you could fly into your wingman eventually, and you couldn't collide. You could crash into the ground and then do like a 2,000 foot per minute descent rate onto a runway, and you were good. Nothing happened to you, type of thing. So we got into DCS because it had teeth. It had weapons that worked. It had SAMs that could fire at you, AAA. It had damage modeling. It had realistic physics. As a real-life pilot, you jump into DCS. The first thing that hit me is you look at the flight path marker, and it's bouncing around like you see in HUD videos online. It's also the way a real aircraft feels. If you've never flown an aircraft, just imagine how you felt as a passenger in maybe turbulence or light, turbulence in an airliner. If you think about it, you're not sitting like rock solid on rails, is the expression that we use in flight sims. It wasn't an on rails experience. You're moving and grooving. You're kind of bouncing around in your seat. Pilots call it seat of your pants flying, and you can see that flight path marker moving, bobbing around, where it's just hard to describe it if you don't fly aircraft. But if you've been in a boat, it's probably closer to that experience where the boat's constantly moving and bobbing, and yeah, there's those days where it's completely smooth and still and you don't feel anything. For the most part, the aircraft is moving around. When I flew in the A-10 for the first time, you could see the aircraft just kind of hitting pockets in the air and turbulence and wind shifting as you move through different altitudes, wind shear at low level and things like that. And it was just unbelievable. And then on top of just the great foundation for a flight sim, you had a combat sim on top of that, which was based, to my knowledge, on Flaming Cliffs, and then previous to that was based on the IL-2 engine. So ultimately, DCS is based on the IL-2 engine. You can see the similarities in terrain when you look at the trees and the way things are and the way the aircraft moves. That's all based on the IL-2 engine. The physics, well, people don't realize, I say that a lot, but I'm sure people do realize, but I think people don't understand, is how sophisticated IL-2 was for its time. And I still enjoy it. You guys see my videos, I post on it. It's an incredible flight sim. It has the physics, it has damage modeling, and it feels like a real aircraft. The first time I flew IL-2, and I tried stalls and slips and every maneuver that I could do in real life in IL-2, I was immediately like, this sim, the physics and the flight modeling in this sim, although not perfect, and the graphics aren't the greatest or anything like that, this feels like a real aircraft. If you're not a pilot and you want to know what a real aircraft feels like and moves like, don't jump into FSX, don't jump into X-Plane. Fly IL-2, and I guarantee you that is the closest experience in a flight sim that you can get to flying a real aircraft. Now, I will say, like, you have new coding now. A2A, Cessna 172, I endorse it as a real pilot who flew 172. I completely endorse it. It flies exactly like the real aircraft. There's really nothing that I can think of that is outside of the range of what it feels like. That's all due to coding. Okay, it's not what FSX does as a basic flight sim. That's what you have to understand. FSX by itself does not model flight great. It's a decent flight model. It does an okay job. It's a great, like one of my friends likes to say, procedural trainer, which means that you can go through procedures, ILS approaches, RNAV approaches. ATC is incredible in FSX. The weather, is really great. But you need all these add-ons to kind of put the icing on the cake for FSX to really work the way it should. And A2A is a great example. They're pretty much the pinnacle, along with PMDG as being being able to model real flight modeling and physics within the FSX engine. And that is, it's an amazing feat that they were even able to do it. So when I talk about FSX, I'm not talking about the advanced coding that these high echelon companies create. I'm talking about the baseline FSX product. So if you jump in the regular Cessna 172 in flight sim and try to slip it, see what happens. Okay, you try to stall it and see what kind of stall characteristics does it have. It's pretty sloppy. It feels like a flying brick. A lot of people complain FSX on the ground, it feels like you're just on ice, and it really does. I mean, when you brake, just there's no bumps and things like that. A2A has to add like AccuFeel in order for you to feel like you're actually on a surface. When you jump into DCS or you jump into IL-2, all of those physics are in the sim. They're a foundational part of the sim. They're how the developers created the flight physics to be and the ground physics to be. So it's not something that a third-party developer has to squeeze in or try to circumvent. The problems with DCS, obviously, Nevada. The promise for a long time now, and it's still not out. Progress is extremely slow. And here's what I want the flight sim community to understand from my perspective, okay, is that it takes, right now, when you think about the development time of an aircraft, we are approaching such a high fidelity in flight sims that, and PMDG is a perfect example, or the VRS, perfect example of that. We're approaching such a high level of quality and fidelity that it almost rivals real production times for actual aircraft. And what I mean by that is, if PMDG is creating a 737, they have their work cut out for them in that they already have blueprints and they have models and scales and pictures, and you know, they can go to the company sites and figure out how avionics work, and they can read the manuals for the flight computer and figure out how that works, and you know, look at the HUD and see, you know, how can we model that in the 737, the new HUD you know, display. But in order to implement that into the sim and develop that, it's almost like a real-time process. It takes so much time to create textures, to create the 3D model, to create the systems, hydraulic systems, electrical systems, radio systems, not just to model them the way they look on the exterior, but to also to code all of that information, okay? So now you're going from IL-2, where you're just modeling a basic, you know, within that great flight, you know, physics type environment, you're creating a model that is moving and operating within that model. Now with DCS World War II, for instance, you have to create the electrical system, the primary hydraulic system, the secondary hydraulic system, you know, all the different sound recordings. You have to model 3D gauges and have the gauges work exactly as they should in real life. So now you're getting closer and closer to development times of a real aircraft inside a flight simulator. And that's why development times take so long. Now contrast what's going on today with what happened years ago. I love to use Jane's F-18 as an example. Jane's, I believe, I can't remember exactly now, they had between 30 and 60 full-time staff that worked on Jane's for 6 years out of, I think it was Baltimore, for 6 years straight before that was released. Now think about this. That was one aircraft and one simulator. Now they did have to build the simulator, the engine up from scratch. So you know, that takes a significant amount of time. And then they just built one aircraft. But that took 6 years and a full-time staff to do that. Made a few $1 million. They definitely made their money back. And F-18, Jane's F-18 is still flown today. Jane's F-18, remarkable. And I still talk about it today, and I still fly it today. You know, it had a one of the things that VRS is working on is the whole, you know, air-to-ground radar, and it took them a long time to develop it. DCS, to our knowledge, still doesn't have a working air-to-ground radar. Check this out. Jane's, back in 2001, had a working air-to-ground radar, working FLIR system, where you could lock up targets, things like that, working Maverick head seeker, okay? It had a terrain-following radar, all right? If you jump in the Jane's F-18 right now and you're flying low level, and you put the air-to-ground radar into terrain mapping mode, or TA, excuse me, terrain avoidance mode. It'll highlight like things that you can hit in red, things that are nearby in yellow, and things that you're clear in green. We're talking about over, a decade-year-old sim that's doing this stuff. FLIR, laser-guided bombs where the laser would go off before impact, or you can manually laser the target if you wanted to. You could do JDAMs and Janes. You pre-program its pre-brief target, so like pre-brief mode, drop the ordinate, so drop it on an exact coordinate. All of the systems that we're waiting for in DCS, VRS, that we are, biting our nails for and can't wait for, these systems are already implemented in these older sims. So BMS, the new kid on the block, it's really like the old guy on the block. Falcon 4.0 blew everybody away. I never got into it until recently with BMS. I always wanted Janes, I always wanted Falcon 4. In high school, I wasn't able to afford it, unfortunately. But I always had my eye on it, and I knew that it was a high-fidelity sim. Comparing BMS to everything that I've experienced in the past, it is, I would say, without a doubt, absolutely the best combat flight simulation that has ever existed, hands down. And I will literally put IL-2 second to BMS, and it's for one main reason, because when you talk about systems, Jane's pretty much is a brother to Falcon 4.0. Jane's F-18 and the Jane series, they can pretty much go head-to-head as far as systems and avionics capability. When you're talking about the dynamic campaign generator, that completely sets BMS apart. And we're talking about full war modeling, where you're one little piece of the war. You're just one F-16 pilot out of one base, out of one squadron, and you're having an impact on the war. Okay? You're having an impact, but so is every other. There's F-16 pilots, there's Mirage pilots, there's F-18 pilots in the campaign, and they're all having their own little piece of the pie. What Falcon BMS captures that no other sim has been able to capture is packaging of aircraft, where you have a strike group that incorporates a seed flight or expression of enemy air defenses combined in the same flight, in the same package, that are a few minutes apart, combined with a offensive counter-air strike package, combined with a combat air patrol package, etc. Also combined with an air-to-air refueling component. So Falcon BMS captures this dynamic campaign capability that nothing else has been able to touch, and truly it has impressed me beyond anything that I've ever seen. It's probably one of the most immersive sims that you'll ever play. And if you haven't heard about Falcon BMS or Falcon 4.0, just do a YouTube search, and you'll see tons of videos on it. We use it at DCS Wolfpack. In fact, it's our main sim. I'll say that without being shamed. I know our name is DCS Wolfpack, but the reality is Falcon BMS delivers every single thing on our criteria as a military simulation group that we can ask for. So the training's great. We'll jump into we just started the campaign actually, and like our last mission, for instance, we did a bar cap or barricade cap combat air patrol. What that is, it's a combat air patrol to deny a specific sector of airspace. So within a certain nautical mile radius, which we choose about 40 or 50 nautical miles, you don't want to go out and chase bandits that are 70 nautical miles away and go into, our theater of operations is Korea. You don't want to, because you just get yourself shot down by, SAM or something like that. But you're blocking off a certain area of airspace where if you have Su-25s coming into that airspace, you have MiG-29s coming into that airspace, so you can take them out and engage them. And AWACS will literally vector you within the simulation to engage those targets. You'll hear radio chatter similar to Jane's F-18, where guys will be calling out mud spikes and magic on and all these other derivative terms that are real military terms that are used in combat. So we'll use this as well. And it's just, the Falcon community is really amazing. Hats off to BMS. You guys just did an amazing job. 10 years of work, actually over that, but 14 years of work to improve the sim. it still shows that, it's age in certain aspects, specifically the terrain and things like that. But when you're talking about, what BMS has done with the flight model, it's probably the most accurate flight model ever created, right next to A2A and PMDG and VRS. Most accurate F-16 flight model probably ever created in a flight sim. It's actually unbelievable. Trajectories, ballistics for weapons, accurate range engagements for air-to-air missiles and air-to-ground missiles and things like that. The weather system is awesome. If you guys have seen like the rain effects in BMS, hands down best rain effects in any game I think I've ever seen, flight simulation ever created. And that just adds immersion. Now let's talk about eye candy versus fidelity. Okay, a lot of people right now in the flight sim community and the younger generation, console guys. I'm a console guy as well, but I was born on flight sims. We love eye candy. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, there's a quote in the Falcon 4.0 manual, and I love it. It says something like, it's the developer's quote, and they talk about how they love eye candy, or eye candy is important, but not at the cost of fidelity and performance of the sim. Which anybody that tried to run Falcon 4 knew that you couldn't really run it on older systems. But they really tried to optimize it as much as they could. But it was so beyond its time that it would kill your computer to be able to run Falcon 4.0. My computer still, struggles with it at times. It was so beyond its time. So the eye candy is important, but what's more important is fidelity. A guy from the VFA 41 Black Aces, I quoted him on our forum, and I think it was Hedgehog that said this. I kind of forum stalked them. I think they're a great group, and they've been flying Jane's F-18 for just years and years, and they love it, and they also fly IL-2. And I quoted him on our forum, and he says something like this. He says, while people are complaining about how crappy our graphics look in Jane's F-18, and while they're waiting for anticipating flying off of carriers and flying a combat mission, and when's an F-18 going to come out for DCS, all this stuff, we'll be flying a combat sortie tonight, and we'll be landing on a ship at night, coming back from an actual combat mission using our air-to-ground radar, our FLIR system to engage targets and air-to-air targets. And then when we come back, then we can worry, we'll honor your complaints on eye candy. And it was such a true statement, because he basically said, look, eye candy is secondary to fidelity, to immersion level. When you're dodging a SAM in Jane's F-18, you don't really care what the resolution of the SAM is. You can't really see it anyway. You see the smoke trail, gets your heart pumping, you feel the immersion level. You're trying to beat that SAM. Track IR works in Jane's just fine. BMS, same thing. You're not worried about how crappy the terrain looks when you're doing a low-level pop-up strike, on a SAM installation or on an airbase. You're thinking about surviving the mission. And so in the flight sim community, that's kind of one of the main points too, is that we become so obsessed with eye candy that we forget what's really important. And that's why I really push IL-2, is that it is a high-fidelity, amazing flight sim with great physics that doesn't look the greatest by today's standards. It doesn't look bad. It just doesn't meet. It's not going to look like IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad. It's not going to look like that at all. But think about what you have on IL-2. You have all the theaters that you could possibly think of, imagine. You have tons of aircraft. You have shareable cockpits in the B-17 specifically. I mean, you can run a whole crew of gunners, a bomb, the bomb sight Norton guy, bombardier, along with a navigator, co-pilot. You can run all of that. The entire crew can be players, shared cockpit. Now, we dream about that stuff in FSX, but it's a reality in IL-2, and this was 10 years ago, okay? So, community-led sims versus corporate-led sims. Jane's F-18, I've already mentioned, 6 years to develop, huge team of guys. There's two things that we could do in the flight sim community at this point. We could rebuild the wheel, or we can improve things that have already been built. Falcon 4.0, the developers already took the time and effort to really work out bugs, to patch it up, to make sure that it was working right, to create a great foundation. What BMS did is said, you know, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're not going to start a whole new engine. We're just going to build on what's already been established in Falcon 4.0. I wish somebody would do that with Janes. Same thing with IL-2. Team Dalados and, you know, the HSFX and UltraPack teams, they're not going to reinvent a whole new sim. They're just upgrading what we already have in IL-2. Now, of course, there's limitations to that engine, and something new has to come out eventually, you know. But they still work, and they're still great. So now we're presented with the latest sims. Now, DCS, progress is extremely slow. We understand it takes a long time to develop these high-fidelity aircraft. The systems are just unbelievable. And the truth of the matter is, in my opinion, the development teams are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Small teams out of Russia, DCS, ARMA, you know, the IL-2 teams. It's small teams that are trying to develop more sophisticated, probably aircraft that are 20 times more sophisticated than what we saw 10 years ago, and they're doing it with smaller teams. Or at least I think. I don't think that there's a 30 to 60, you know, look at DCS World War II. Look how big their team is. You got a few guys. I mean, it's not a big studio team, and they're all new at this. It's not like they recruited from other sims and things like that, like Janes would do in the past, or MicroProse would do in the past. So it does take a long time. We're expecting, as a flight sim community, we're expecting so much from developers, and we want our products quick. We want them high fidelity. We want it perfect. We want the textures perfect, and we want it to take, you know, 2 months' time, and it's just absolutely unrealistic. So what do developers do? In order to meet the demand for the flight sim community, they end up releasing products in alpha, or to fund their projects. Probably more of the reason they end up releasing projects in alpha and early beta and things like that. So instead of getting create a whole new engine, we're just going to look at what's good, look at what works, look at what's already been created, and we're going to improve on that, and we're going to make it better. And then companies like, you know, DCS World War II, they're trying to develop these engines, and it's just taking a crazy amount of time, whether it's for funding, whether it's because they have conflicting projects with military contracts, small teams, you know, whatever the case, bad management. We don't know. We love to complain about it. The reality is, we really don't know, you know, all of the reasons why it's taken so long, you know. But I can think that it's because just the high fidelity of aircraft that we're developing. Look at the VRS. Look how long it took for that aircraft to be created. PMDG. Some guys might disagree and say, you know, if you're really determined, a developer can create aircraft really fast. It's not so much, I think, yeah, it takes a long time to create the aircraft, but the problems that we're having are fundamentally at the engine. Like the DCS engine is technically in beta. It's not completed yet. And so every time we try to implement a new module, you know, it goes into the engine, but it's not able to accept it properly. We had issues with the AMRAAMs, with the F-15, with FC3, Flaming Cliffs 3. We had issues with SAMs being able to circumvent mountains and see targets through mountains. Just some of the problems that occurred in DCS, and it's because it's still a buggy engine and it really hasn't been completed yet. So the point of this entire, you know, video is to really, one, support community-led sims, explain a little bit of why DCS Wolfpack, why we moved into BMS. You know, DCS is in the back burner a little bit, and well, it is in the back burner, and until, you know, we get a fixed engine, basically, until we get aircraft that are flyable and not have SAM circumvent mountains, you know, until we get a different theater than just Georgia. You know, BMS has how many different theaters? IL-2 is just mind-boggling. You could recreate almost any World War II scenario that you can dream of, at least any popular one, right now in IL-2. HSFX, the AI improvements, the flight model improvements, just unbelievable. So one, praise to the amazing modding communities. You know, I just love you guys. Thank you for all of the hard work, every ounce of sweat throughout the years that you guys have poured into these sims, including the ARMA modding community, the ACE team. I can't thank you guys enough. The BMS team, The IL-2 team Dallas does for not giving up on IL-2 and still continuing to provide official patches for the community. You know, and I also want to thank DCS and DCS World War II for VRS, for TACPAC. You guys are creating things that are new. Yeah, there's a lot of issues, but at least you're trying. You know, my message to the flight sim community is, one, calm down. All right, just calm down. Stop criticizing everything developers are doing. You know, in the meantime, if you're waiting for that next aircraft in FSX, if you're waiting for TACPAC, if you're waiting for FSX at War, if you're waiting for the, you know, like can't wait for the F-18 and BMS 4.33. I can't wait till that thing comes out. You're waiting for these things. Enjoy the sims that work. Enjoy the sims that have proven themselves over the test of time and continue to shine and providing like amazing, and take it from a real life pilot. Okay, IL-2, BMS, DCS provide amazing, very, very close to life feeling of flight. And I love flight sims. DCS Wolfpack, just to advertise our site a little bit. Again, we're called DCS. You know, we still, you know, we can fly DCS. If you guys want to start up a squadron or start up a DCS night, it's all good. We can do that. We're not giving up on DCS by any means. But we also do BMS, we do ARMA, we do the DevGru Navy SEAL thing. Anything MILSIM pretty much we're into. Right now we are completely high on BMS. For the foreseeable future, we'll be probably flying the Korea theater for the next year or so. And yeah, just a different kind of video from my channel. Hope to see some comments. The point of this video is not to stir up any type of fanboys or flame, you know, like just arguments and disruption on the comments. If that starts occurring, you know, I might just, you know, disable comments or something. That's not the point, okay? The point is to show appreciation, to give a little insight on why, you know, some of these projects are taking so long, and not to make excuses for DCS. Yeah, they've been promising Nevada for forever now, and they just haven't delivered, okay? But it's just to give some insight on the differences between community-led sims versus corporate-led sims, and also to talk about the differences between where sims were, you know, a decade ago and where they are now, and how we expect so much from the flight sim community. If you're interested in any type of MILSIM stuff, go ahead and submit an application at our website, DCS Wolfpack. And I hope this video is not offensive to anybody. And if it is, too bad. But you know, truly, I hope it just stirs up conversation within the flight sim community about what we expect, you know, how high our expectations are, and just encourage some good conversation about where we're going in the future and where we've come from. Again, thanks again to BMS. Thanks again to IL-2 for doing a great job. And I'll see you guys next time.